Our first guest is ready, and today is World Press Freedom Day. To commemorate it in Nigeria, President Buhari has urged the media community to report with caution and an awareness that nothing could be more important than the unity of the country in the grand scheme of things. Joining us now from our Rise Abuja studio is Jideofor Adibe, Professor of International Relations and Political Science at Nasarawa State University, Kefi, in North Central Nigeria, to revisit President Buhari's exhortation in addition to the duties of and challenges facing journalists in the course of discharging their professional responsibilities. Welcome to the program, Professor Adibe. Good morning.
Thank you, my brother Ruben.
Well, let me start by saying happy World Press Freedom Day. You know, we are all in this together. But before we begin to look at the Nigerian dimension of it, let's try to unpack the theme for this year's World Press Freedom Day, which is information as a public good. How much of a public good can information be, and what are the major issues that we need to focus on?
Thank you very much, Ruben. I think this theme, I suspect it was inspired, if not borrowed, from a report, goodwill message, you would say, that Joseph Stiglitz sent to UNESCO's communication. They had something last year, so he talked about, say, information is public good, we must all support it. But actually, it resonates very well with one of the arguments used in support of free speech jurisprudence. There are usually key arguments, 4 key arguments. The first that is free speech is something that should be promoted because it is vital for discovering the truth. That is, it is only by allowing unfettered competition of ideas in the marketplace of ideas that you discover the truth. The second, which relates to this information as public good, is what they say that freedom, press freedom in that sense, of freedom of expression, is something, part of self-fulfillment, is something to be cherished for its own, on its own. And of course, the third idea is that in a democracy, once you have freedom of expression, then citizens will become effective participants in the democratic process. And the fourth usually is that there is a huge distrust of government. And that the only way to ensure that the government doesn't trample on the rights of people is to ensure this free flow of information, to ensure that there's almost an unfettered freedom of speech. And as you know, that's also the background of the First Amendment in the U.S. Constitution. So when they say information as public good, it's really going back to the whole debate in free speech jurisprudence about information as an aspect of self-fulfillment.
What do you make of Nigeria's ranking at 120 out of 180 on the World Press Freedom Index?
That's very interesting. Let me also say that let me answer this question by going a little back to the whole idea of World Press Freedom Day. And that actually originated in 1991 in Windhoek, Namibia. During 1991, it was in 1993 that the UN General Assembly officially dedicated it. But in 1991, there was a UNESCO conference in Windhoek, Namibia, when they recommended there should be a day dedicated for world press freedom. So the UN adopted that. What am I saying? From that 1991 to now, a lot of things has happened. And you can argue that a lot of African countries have done extremely well in terms of freedom. But the environment in some are also deteriorating. If you look at that Namibia that hosted it then, that time in 1991, the conference, the emphasis was on print media. At that time, you can hardly count a number of countries from Africa that were regarded where press freedom was giving high mark. But if you look at 2021 index, okay, Nigeria, moved down from 115, position of 115 over 180, which it was ranked in 2020, to 120. But then Ghana, small Ghana, had been 30, was ranked 30, better than the United Kingdom, which was ranked at 34. You see, Namibia is the best performing, ranked 24, just a little one step down from its ranking in 2021. And it's not just that. If you look at the reports, some other reports from, Reporters Without Borders, they've always expressed concern about the environment of press freedom in Nigeria. And it's actually part of the whole story of virtually all the indices of development going southwards in the country. So it's been a deterioration. There was a time we did relatively better, but now 120 out of 180 countries, you could say you're still better than 60 countries, but that's not enough. Burkina Faso is better. Even Chad is ranked higher than us. Senegal. So it's still really a source of concern.
All right. Thank you so much for that insight. But just imagine this is a cocktail, and I want you to help me unpack this cocktail. If there's anything like that. Press freedom. Vis-a-vis censoring the press in the name of national security. And let me put a topping of citizen journalism on top of it. The proliferation of social media, anybody who has a phone can be a citizen journalism. But press freedom, censoring the press in the name of, national security. Don't tell it the way it is because of national security. And the sprinkling of citizen journalism on top of it. Tell me how that feels in your mouth as a cocktail.
Thank you very much. I will lump that question about citizen journalism with, again, going a little bit back to history. In the 60s and 70s, again, UNESCO, the same UNESCO was a site of several conversations and debates around what was then known as the World Information and New World Information and Communication Order. And that debate had centered on countries from the South agitating for a restructuring of the ecology of information at that time. Within that debate emerged what they call development journalism. Development journalism then was seen as journalists should no longer be content to just report on press releases from government and to just write something that governments more or less validating government's position, that they should really, interrogate positions of the government, and they should have the idea of development at their heart. The citizens and what should be in the best interest of the country rather than what the state says. That is the whole idea of the debate on development journalism. To bring it down to what you're talking about, the control in the name of security. At that time, the debate on development journalism was going on. Also emerged what they call developmental journalism, where the state, most African states, or many African states at that time, tried to appropriate the whole agenda by arguing that it is a developmental state, that journalists and reporters ought to see things from the perspective of the government, that it is engaged in development. Mind you, when it calls itself developmental state, it's not in the sense in which it was used to describe Japan after the Second World War, but just in a totally different sense. In which case, if you do not support what the government of the day is doing, then you are tagged either as somebody distracting the government from its development agenda. So it became that tension between development state and developmental state, both arguing, the journalists arguing, look, we have a responsibility to the society. And they started to deconstruct. And I would like to think that The Guardian, where Ruben worked for a long time, was one of the leaders in that kind of development journalism, brought a number of academics like Dr. Abati and the rest of them, and they started writing in a more or less academic manner. So how do they bring citizen journalism? So what you can see is trying to restrain, using what they call sometimes prior restraint, putting a number of things on the ground that will chill speech or make journalists not give them enough room, enough freedom to report. But then, what happens in this case then, the citizens, from the 2000s when social media became an issue, started emerging, the government was no longer able to control the press the way it used to. It could no longer come and jail Thompson and the rabbi and say they have, embarrassed government officials, as Buhari did under the Decree 4. The more you do it now, you have citizen journalists everywhere. But it's still now the same idea, the quest to be able to control. So once they found out that they can no longer...
Professor Adibe, sorry to interrupt you. We need to take a short commercial break. When we return the conversation, we'll continue. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the morning show here on the Arise News Channel. Our guest is still Professor Jideofor Adibe, Professor of International Relations and Political Science at Nasarawa State University, Kefi, in north-central Nigeria. Well, Professor Adibe, before we went on break, you were still making your points, and I would like you to conclude on that about development journalism, citizen journalism, and all of that. But quickly, when you are done with that, maybe we would like to have your response to the statement issued on behalf of President Buhari on the occasion of World Press Freedom Day, that yes, there's no such thing called licentious freedom. Even when we talk about press freedom being very important, that is more important for Nigerian journalists to think along the lines of freedom with responsibility. In other words, the statement was about responsible journalism. And the president also made a case for the Freedom of Information Act, which, yes, is there, but are we following it? Are the various departments of state allowing that? And then in a related development, the Senate President, Ahmed Lawan, talked about bad eggs in the Nigerian media who need also to be patriotic. What will be your response to some of these statements on the occasion of the World Press Freedom Day?
Thank you, Ruben. Let me just quickly respond to the Ahmed Lawan, Senate President and Buhari before continuing the other one. They are just the same about the tension between development journalism and developmental. So he says he wants you to do responsible journalism. And who defines what is responsible? It is just in that light of the developmental journalism that, look, we're a developmental state. You need to see things, report on government successes. So they define what is responsible. And you, because under the model of development journalism, it is seen as adversarial. You are not, your allegiance is not to the government of the day. You interrogate whatever they say. So the government necessarily doesn't like it. They see it as adversarial. So it is in line with what both Senate President Ahmed Lawan and what President Buhari talked about responsible journalism. And they define it. And that is their own notion of developmental journalism. But back to the question of citizen journalism. In this tension between development and developmental journalism, it was much easier for the states, especially African states, to control and doctor the press. And on the argument that, the country is in a kind of a state of emergency, development is the key agenda, you are enemies of progress, you have to, either do things that will not compromise national security. They use several forms of epithets and vocabularies to say the same thing, that essentially see things from the perspective of the government. So it's not anything new. But we do know, of course, there's something called responsible journalism. But essentially because the state is very distrusted, they are not the ones to promote it. Usually in many countries, for example, you can find the Nigerian Guild of Editors. They will be the ones to give a checklist, a taxonomy of what they will regard as responsible journalism. You cannot expect the state that is distrusted, very, very much so distrusted, to come and preach responsible journalism to you. Let me tell you this, and if some of the media people from Minister of Information, Lai Mohammed, Femi Adesina, and Garba Shehu, if they come to make a speech, you don't expect them to be against the government. You might as well turn off your set because you know what they will say. So in that sense, they're just living up to expectation. And the people who really want to take the other side we'll interrogate them, sometimes agree with what they say, and when they fail, and they will tell them they have failed. And because in Africa, African big men and African states do not like to be criticized. And when you criticize them, it becomes a different thing.
Well, we are living through some really tense times at the moment. What exactly is your prescription for the role of the media? Because the media has been quite harshly criticized by all manners of voices, some I won't even dignify by mentioning, and sort of elevated the role of the media, or should I say diminished the role of the media to that of criminals. Accusations have been made that the media is responsible for a lot of the tension that is going on. So what exactly, in your opinion, is the role of the media?
Let me again bring back to the theme. Essentially, there are three within this information as public good. This year's theme is focusing on three essential aspects. The challenge of news media. The important one that I find very interesting is the need, for continued education. They call it media education or something like that. And they want to be able to empower people so that given the continuous flow of information, people will be able to differentiate between information and other forms of communication content. That includes data, that includes hate speech, that includes disinformation, and that includes misinformation. So the environment we are, not just in Nigeria, but globally, there are conversations. For example, the new form of journalism, this digital journalism, it presents a lot of challenges. And you can see how the developed countries and the developing countries are trying to deal with it. For example, let's talk about the one on social media. African states tend to use what we call prior restraint. They put in place mechanisms that will chill speech, will make you afraid of even to say something. For example, under their social media law, you can see that in Tanzania, for you to set up a blog, you need to get a license, which will cost you about $900. In Uganda, you have a social media tax. If you compare them with, say, in Germany, because now increasingly people are believing that, yes, there's a need for a form of control of social media, but how? Now, if you look at what Germany did, in 2018, it said, well, if you're a media company, a social media or internet company, you need to put mechanism in place so that if there is any complaint about your content, you'll be able to pull it down within 24 hours. Mark you, this is not prior restraint. You can express it, but if something goes wrong, you have to react. In 2019, Britain did something like that, that if there's any complaint about content, you must pull it down within an hour. The European Union also focused on videos. If there's complaint, you must pull it down. But in our own case, it's about chilling speech. It's about what they call prior restraint. People cannot even express. So the environment here is quite challenging in Nigeria. You know about last year, it was Omahi who had said a journalist wrote something that was against the Ebonyi State Act because he wrote something about Lassa fever. And the journalist was more or less harassed. So the environment, as some of the watchdogs have noted in Nigeria, is actually very, very challenging. And that is reflected in our decline in the World Press Freedom Index. But it's much more so than that. We have had some Prof. Governors that harass journalists.
Okay, Prof. It's just a shame that we don't have enough time to ask questions. But maybe you can take this and just think about it. The insight will be who watches the watchdog. That will be a conversation I'd like to have in the coming days. But thank you so much for your time, Prof. Really appreciate it.